So, friends, basically, I'm supposed to speak on commons and accountability, uh, specifically on rivers. Though earlier a topic was given me was water, but Rakshita later on clarified that I'm supposed to speak on rivers. So I'll start with that. The first question that comes to mind is, what is a river? So this is a very, seems very obvious, but what is the definition of a river? When we talk about resources, governance, and so on, we need to understand the resource we are talking about. So, anyway, rivers is, as Khush said, is an ecosystem, uh, but it is so much more than that. Uh, uh, it's a flow of water, but it is not just a flow of water. It flows from mountains to delta, but it is not just flows from mountain to delta. It also flows sideways and underground. And now there are also people talking about atmospheric rivers. Uh, then uh, what flows in the river? So there is water, but there is not just water. There is also sand and nutrients and biodiversity and so on. So the river has many different dimensions. It's a landscape level ecosystem. Uh, So this is broadly, we have attempted a very complicated definition of river, which encompasses most of the elements of the rivers that we could think of, but I'll not go into it here. Hmm. But the point is, if you ask this question, what is a river to our governance system? Nowhere there is a definition of what is a river. There is, of course, nothing in the constitution or law specifically for governance of rivers in India. That's completely absent. Uh, the water is there. Uh, the river is only there in the context of interstate river water, but that's also there. Also, it's not the river; it's the water that is important. So, interstate tribunals really don't look at the river; they only look at the water and how the water is to be distributed between the states. They aren't bothered about river actually. So, there is no real institute really working for the governance of rivers, either at the state or the central level. Though water is a state subject, so one expected at the state level there will be any, but there isn't really one institute. And there is no protection for an ecosystem called river, explicit protection from the law, any of the laws, uh, because of course the resource itself remains undefined. So there will be, one doesn't expect them to be. So broadly, so river, what is, so, there is a lack of understanding as to what is a river and what are its roles in current and future well-being of the society. There is neither an understanding nor a recognition how lives and livelihoods of millions of people depend on river, many of them directly and many more indirectly. Uh, Okay, I should also stop here to say also, if you have any questions in between, please don't hesitate to ask. And because I'm reading from the PPT, I won't see the screen, but you can just speak in between if you want to. Yeah. Now, the decisions and working of large number of agencies, there are, because river is a very huge landscape level entity, the decisions and working of a large number of agencies would affect the rivers. Uh, and also considering the society's wide-ranging needs for water and other services provided by rivers, one expected that the river will have huge impact in terms of the functioning of many different agencies. But one doesn't expect, in spite of that, that there is no real recognition of the river as an entity or its protection in the law or the constitution. If you ask the question, I asked that about a few years back and wrote about it. Who governs India's rivers? So, uh, there is no agency really governing a river actually. There is no specific agency. There are a lot of agencies who are governing aspects which impact the river without really understanding or recognizing such impacts are happening through their functioning, but it's there. But there is no one agency which governs any of the river or rivers in general in India. Uh, the water is the state subject, so one expected that the state government would have some agencies working for the protection of rivers, but even in the states there is none. Uh, However, there are a large number of entities at both at the center and state level which take decisions that affect the river. Uh, and as I said, they don't seem to be really aware of what kind of impact they are having. Somebody asked about cost benefit analysis. So, for example, we have this river valley projects, dams, hydropower projects, river linking projects, flood control projects, irrigation projects, etc. Now, if you look at the cost benefit analysis of any of these projects, now those projects are, for example, any dam is on the river. And when there is a dam built on a river, somebody else was asking what are the impacts they want to understand. So, what the direct impact, one thing is that the river gets destroyed. How? Because one of the driver of the river is flow. And the dam completely stops the flow of the river. So dam is supposed to do that. It stores water in the upstream, and downstream, most of the time nothing flows. Except in monsoon, there is surplus water, they open the gates or overflow is there and that is this. But as far as the dam is concerned, they stop the flow, which means they actually destroy the river because you can't have a river without a flow. In the upstream of the dam, there is a stagnant water. And in the downstream of the dam, there is no water most of the time. Now that flow, so the stoppage of the flow has many impacts, both upstream and downstream. And the impacts are not immediate upstream or immediate downstream. The impact actually are whole river basin-wide impact actually. But coming back to what I was saying, so if we have so many dams, and every dam needs to be approved by various agencies. So there is a techno-economic clearance given by for irrigation or typical irrigation projects by the Central Water Commission, or a typical hydropower project by the Central Electricity Authority. And if you manage to get hold of any cost-benefit analysis of any dam, there will be streams like in the cost side, there will be how much cement is required, how much steel is required, how much manpower is required, how much land is required, because you need land to build the dam. There is submergence area and there is canals to be built. So you need a lot of land. So there is land cost is there. So all these costs are there. But what the river does, as I said, is destroys the river and all the services that the river provides, both upstream and downstream. What is the cost of those services? What is the cost of an entity called river itself? You won't find any mention of that in the cost stream at all. What it means directly is that in India's government scheme of things, river has no value. It doesn't figure in the cost benefit. So this is a very important point to note. We have a lot of blind spot in the way we govern our rivers and lack of understanding. Now, okay, coming back to, I was going to talk about institutes that govern rivers, directly or indirectly. For at the central level, there is a ministry of what was called earlier water resources. Now it is called Jal Shakti. There is Central Water Commission. There is Ministry of Environment and Forest because it approves a lot of the dam projects and generally deals with the environment. There is the Ministry of Agriculture, because agriculture is the biggest user of water. Uh, there is Ministry of Urban Development. Urban areas need a lot of water. Urban development looks at those issues. There is Ministry of Rural Development, which, for example, looks at things like rural water supply and uh, even watershed development kind of things. There is a Central Groundwater Board, which looks at the governance of groundwater, and the Central Groundwater Authority. But the point is, then, what is the role? Why is it is important in the context of rivers? Does groundwater have anything to do with the rivers? Does anybody want to hazard a guess? Does groundwater have anything to do with rivers?
Recharging, is it? Natural.
Yeah, so one is that river itself recharges groundwater. Is there anything else? So, for example, the water flow that you see in the river, some of it is a contribution from groundwater. So, for example, in the upstream, river recharges groundwater. In the downstream, some of that groundwater comes back to the river, and particularly in the non-monsoon months. In the monsoon months, river is in spate and it actually recharges a lot of the aquifers. In the non-monsoon months, the water flow in a lot of our India, particularly peninsular rivers and even some of the Himalayan rivers, lot of that water is actually discharged from the groundwater aquifer into the river. So there is a very dynamic equilibrium between groundwater and surface water, and there is no separate entity called groundwater. It's all connected. There is a Central Pollution Control Board. These days, there is also Ministry of Transport that deals with the water, because it deals with rivers, because it deals with waterways. We have National Waterways Authority of India. We have National Water Development Agency. There is National Institute of Hydrology. There is a National Water Academy. We have Technical Advisory Committee in the Central Water Commission, which has a big role in terms of sanctioning, giving techno-economic clearance to all the dam projects or river-related projects. There are interstate tribunals, which are supposed to be river tribunals, but essentially water tribunals. There is Central Electricity Authority, because it deals with hydropower projects. There is WAPCO, there is National Hydropower Corporation, SJV. We can go on and on. There's so many agencies which deal directly, most of these are dealing directly with the water and rivers. There is NMCG, National Mission for Clean Ganga, which is a new agency which is supposed to be dealing with Ganga. But if you look at its functioning, it's mostly deal with the sewage treatment or industrial water treatment and so on. It really doesn't look at Ganga as a river, actually. There are interstate boards, river boards, on Bansagar, on Betwa, Upper Yamuna, Brahmaputra, Narmada, Tungabhadra, Ganga control, flood control. Recently, people from Telangana here. So, for example, there is KRMB and GRMB, Krishna River Management Board and Godavari River Management Boards. So, there are a number of institutes which deal with rivers directly and indirectly. There is, of course, similar large number of institutes doing at the state level, parallel to the central level. And then there is judiciary, media, religion, civil society, and society at large that deals with the river. Let me also quickly go through the basic elements of riverscape as a commons. So what constitute a river? So of course there is river channel and the river bed, which includes sand, boulders, rocks. All of that is part of the river bed. Then there are streams, tributaries, distributaries of the river. Then there is river flow, which includes water, silt, nutrients, biodiversity. And there is biodiversity around the river, which includes aquatic, amphibian, terrestrial, plants, animals, microbes, large number of biodiversity. Then there is a floodplain that goes beyond the riverbed itself on both sides, where the river That's the flooding area of the river. The river floods particularly in the plains area. So that is called floodplain, and it's very important. It's integral part of the river, and it's very important function to role to play in the existence of a river. Then there is a catchment area in the mountains, in the plains. As I said earlier, groundwater aquifers, deltas. For the Himalayan rivers, there are glaciers and snowscape areas. The floods and droughts are part of the river cycles. Rainfall and snowfall majorly contribute to the river, as do the climate in general. So these are some of the immediately elements one can see, understand, which are related to river. Now, what I will do is to understand the governance of rivers. How do we govern our rivers? I've already mentioned the institutes, etc. But I'll look at two broad case studies to understand how do we govern our rivers. And those case studies then you can focus on to understand various aspects related to governance of rivers. The first, I call it case study for better term, but basically what I mean is that there are two key aspects I'll highlight in little more detail. One is, how do we give environment clearance to the river valley projects? River valley projects includes dams, hydropower projects, irrigation projects, river linking projects, and so on. Now, this environment clearance process is very important because it reflects a lot about how do we govern our rivers, and there are various agencies in the way we do it. So now, what are the components of environment clearance process? So there is an expert appraisal committee in the Ministry of Environment and Forest, which looks at the proposals for environment clearance at the central level. There is a similar authority at the state level, and there is an environment impact assessment notification, which says that which projects will be dealt by the environment EIA notification comes under the Environment Protection Act 1986. And EIA notification tells you which projects are dealt by the state and which are dealt by the center. So larger projects, interstate projects, any hydropower projects above 50 megawatts, any irrigation projects with irrigation more than 10,000 hectares, any multi-purpose projects, any projects which is interstate or which close to the national boundary, etc., are dealt with the center. And there is expert appraisal committee. It's supposed to be a multidisciplinary committee with a lot of independent people and also couple of officials from the Ministry of Environment, one official from Central Water Commission, one official from Wildlife Institute of India, one person from Fisheries Institute, so CIFRI, Central India Fisheries Research Institute. So some of these agencies are there. Then there's others supposed to be independent members. Actually, they are supposed to be because the government never appoints independent people on these bodies. They only appoint mostly yes men and rarely a yes woman. So that's the expert appraisal committee at the Ministry of Environment Forest, specifically for river valley projects. And that functioning of the EAC is very important to understand how do we govern our rivers. The EAC itself gives two kinds of a number of kind of clearance, but broadly two kinds of clearance. One is what is called TOR, Terms of Reference for the Environment Impact Assessment Study, which is the first stage clearance. And then there is a EIA. Once the EIA is ready after public hearing, it comes back to full EIA, comes back to the EAC for recommendation for environment clearance. The recommendation of the clearance from the EAC then goes to the Ministry of Environment, and Ministry of Environment then decides whether to give a clearance or not, but it rarely says no. So In fact, even EAC has a remarkable track record of clearing almost everything that comes its way. So, a lot of propaganda we listen that this EACs and environment governance clearance process is a hindrance. I mean, that's nonsense because the projects never get rejected by these agencies. Almost never. The rare occasions are there when they get rejected. So, but it's less than 0.1%. So after the recommendation of the EAC, the ministry decides whether to give clearance. In the process, as I said, once the first stage, after first stage clearance of the terms of reference, the terms of reference are for the EIA to be conducted, and then the developer, the project development agency, hires a agency to do the EIA study, consultant basically, and it's paid by the same development agency. The EIA agency is paid by them, so we can understand that what kind of report they will give. An EIA agency, which is in the business of doing EIA, if it ever says that the project is non-viable because it has very serious impacts, then it will not be in the business because it will never get another project to do EIA. So if he wants to remain in the EIA business, it has to keep giving clearances. And because they're paid by the development agency, they will try to please the development agency. So that's the kind of EIAs we have. But after the EIA is ready, draft EIA is ready, then there is supposed to be a public hearing process. And then public hearing is broadly conducted by the State Pollution Control Board. And the State Pollution Control Board one official from the district collector office sits to conduct the public hearing. Now, this is also public hearing is also a very interesting phenomenon. So, it's supposed to be the only place in the whole cycle of a project where there is some namesake role for the local communities. But if you look through the history of how the public hearing gets conducted, what happens in the public hearing, and so on, you will find that this is totally there is no real role for the people. For example, the EIA, which is supposed to be the basis for informed participation of the local communities in the public hearing, is always in English. And it's only available in the website. On some couple of websites it's available. And there is a executive summary of which is translated into local language, mostly Hindi, but not yet in other local language. And even that, we find many times executive summary doesn't even reflect what is written in EIA. It's more propaganda for the project actually. Now, even after all this, suppose in a public hearing, everyone present there were to say that we don't want this project. This is against public interest. And other things they say, for example, the EIA is wrong. This doesn't really impact. It has not looked at the impact assessment, and we don't need these projects and so on. Suppose that happens. Everyone says no. What happens after that? Nothing, because when the project goes to the EAC, only thing EAC is interested in whether the box against public hearing is tick marked. If the box is tick marked, yes, public hearing has happened, it's satisfied. It's not bothered what happens at the public hearing. So even if everyone were to say no at the public hearing, the projects will go forward. We know there are several examples of that. So this is the kind of public hearing we have. And then after public hearing, it goes to the EAC, it recommends clearance, and then environment clearance is given. Now, typically, environment clearance is based on conditions. One broad condition is that the EIA, Environment Impact Assessment, is supposed to be accompanied by EMP, Environment Management Plan. And the EC is supposed to be conditional to the fact that EMP, Environment Management Plan, will be implemented pari passu with the project implementation. Now, and then there are large number of other conditions. I mean, typically a project developer is happy to get the clearance because it knows that whatever is written in the conditions doesn't really matter. I remember hearing a lecture of Prakash Javadekar when he was environment minister, and he said that, these project developers come to me and say that please हमारा project पड़ा है उसको clear करा दो. तो प्रकाश जावड़ेकर से ठीक है हम देखते हैं क्लियर करेंगे लेकिन उसमें conditions लगेगी. तो project developer would always tell him, प्रकाश जावड़ेकर said, that आप कुछ भी लिख दो condition, कोई दिक्कत नहीं, आप जो condition डालना है डालिए. और प्रकाश जावड़ेकर then replied saying उनको पता है कि एक बार क्लियरेंस मिल गया कोई देखने वाला नहीं है कि कंडीशन इंप्लीमेंट होती है कि नहीं. दैट्स द रियलिटी. सो आफ्टर द clearance, the project comes to the implementation stage, and there is supposed to be implementation of the conditions and environment management plan and so on, and there is supposed to be monitoring to achieve compliance. Now, this monitoring and compliance mechanism, how do they achieve that? So there are a few arms to do that. One is that every 6 months, every project which is got clearance is supposed to submit a report to the Ministry of Environment and put up on its own website, where it will say in that 6 months what it has done to implement the conditions of the environment clearance and environment management plan. I remember the Polavaram project. Some people are from Andhra Pradesh, Telangana. Polavaram project is one of the biggest projects in that area. It got environment clearance in October 2006. And I remember filing an RTI in 2011 or 12, asking for the 6 monthly reports that it has submitted after the clearance. And for 6 years after the clearance, the answer given by Ministry of Environment was that it has not submitted any reports. So in the first way of checking whether the project has following the monitoring, the conditions and so on, is that it is supposed to provide these reports, but even if the reports are not submitted, nothing happens. Suppose the report is submitted. We have been dealing with the EAC and the member secretary in the Ministry of Environment who gets all the reports. He tells us very clearly कि हमें कभी टाइम नहीं होता है, ये रिपोर्ट कभी खोल के देखने का टाइम नहीं होता है. और मिनिस्ट्री में there is nobody in the ministry who reads these reports. So the second, so whether the reports are submitted or not, what it is written in it, there is nobody to check. The another way to do it is, there is supposed to be a regional office of the Ministry of Environment, which is supposed to do two things. One is it is supposed to periodically visit the projects in their region. The officers from the regional office of the MOEF is supposed to do that. And then they are also supposed to do surprise visits. Again, through RTI, some of our friends and we found out what happens in terms of the surprise. Even the surprise visit is essentially they tell the project developer कि हम आ रहे हैं आपके यहाँ सरप्राइज विजिट के लिए, तो आप एक काम करना हमारे लिए व्हीकल और गेस्ट हाउस का इंतजाम करना, नहीं तो वो इंतजाम होगा नहीं ना, तो उसके लिए पहले से इंतजाम हो इसलिए बता देते हैं. So this is the kind of surprise visit there, and that's all. And even if you look at the kind of the projects never really implement most of this thing. And nothing happens if once the project is completed, they just commission the project and then nothing, everybody forgets about it. So this is broadly the life cycle of environment clearance of river valley projects. I mean, this is a similar story, possibly other environment clearances. But similarly, there is like environment clearance, there is a forest clearance, there is a wildlife clearance, and one can go into the details of those also, but I'll not go into that. The second case study, or whatever you call it, is I want to talk about the operation of dams and floods. One of our friends from Kerala talked about how they are facing floods in the climate change context. Uh, it started from 2018, and after that, almost every year that is happening in Kerala, but it happens every year. Now, what exactly happens is that, okay, now let me begin from the beginning. So every dam can be operated to help moderate floods in the downstream area. So theoretically, it is possible. So it can't control floods totally, but a dam, because it has a storage behind the dam. That storage is supposed to be emptied almost empty at the beginning of the monsoon, because that's why the storage are created. The storage is created so that the water available in monsoon is stored and used in the non-monsoon months. So at the end of the monsoon, when the next monsoon comes, at the end of the non-monsoon season, when the next monsoon comes, it should be practically empty so that you can again fill it up. So except 5 to 10% that you keep as a safety this thing in case the rain fails. It's broadly empty. And when it is empty, it starts getting water. It can be operated such that it can help moderate floods in the downstream area within its capacity, whatever its storage capacity. If its storage capacity is small, its capacity to moderate flood will be lower. If storage capacity is large, it will have a much larger capacity to moderate flood in the downstream area. However, that potential can be realized only if the dam is operated with that objective in mind. If the dam is not operated with that objective in mind, and most dams in India, in fact, practically all dams in India, don't get operated with that objective in mind, then they end up creating avoidable flood disaster in the downstream area. So while every dam, coming back to what I said earlier, every dam potentially can help moderate floods, but every dam can also potentially create flood disaster for the downstream areas. So how do we govern? So this is a very important part of the governance of our rivers, governance of our dams, and within that, operation of our dams. Typically, the easiest option for a dam operator is to, as soon as the water is available, to fill up the dam. Because once they get filled up, they don't have anything to do. Then in monsoon method, as it is, they don't have to release any water because irrigation is not required. It's generally not supplied. Most cases, except there are few dams which supply irrigation in monsoon also. Hydropower projects also, it's easier to operate because once it is full, then you can just operate all the units and just put it in operation. So this is the best way for the laziest way for the dam operator to operate a dam. Fill up as soon as water is available. But that's the prescription of disaster for the downstream area. And there are many examples. In 2018, Kerala, there are a lot of role. The dams actually, the way they were operated, contributed to the disaster. But that was not the only instance. And, we have been talking about it since 2005. In 2006, for example, in Surat, there were unprecedented floods. Half of the city was underwater, and that was in August, between August 7th and 12th, and that was largely because of the unprecedented amount of water suddenly released from the Ukai Dam. Even this year, right now, a debate is going on in Odisha, and both BJP and Congress are accusing the state government that it is because of the mismanagement of the Hirakud Dam that such a flood disaster has happened in Odisha this year, right now. In fact, it is happening right now. And there are many other instances. There are Bakhra, Hirakud, Bandsagar, Sardar Sarovar. I can name dozens of dams which have contributed to this year. Even Tungabhadra contributed majorly to the downstream area Karnataka. The wrong operation of the Srisailam, Gandhi Sagar, Upper Krishna, and Krishna Basin dams created massive flood disaster in 2019 and 20. So many instances can be given. But the point is essentially when we raise this issue that the wrong operation of the dams is creating avoidable flood disaster, typically the dam operators and the Central Water Commission were in complete denial mode so far. But I mean, it was very interesting development happened just 2 weeks back when a session was on, and there was a question about faulty operation of dams leading to flood disaster. In fact, there was a question: can faulty operation of dams lead to flood disaster? And the Ministry of Jal Shakti actually replied saying, yes, faulty operation of dams can lead to flood disaster. This is the first time possibly, as to my memory, when the government is officially recognizing that the faulty operation of dams can lead to flood disaster. However, there were agencies of the government which accepted what we were saying. For example, after the 2018 Kerala, in fact, we were one of the first people to say, even before the flood, the disaster started in Kerala in 2018, that this is going to create disaster. The way Idukki was filled up, and then water started. They had to release water. They had no option. While there was heavy water floods and rainfall in the downstream area. There was, of course, water flow from Mulla Periyar also. Somebody was talking about Mulla Periyar. There is also a small contribution from Mulla Periyar. Again, that could have been avoided if Mulla Periyar was operated in a different way. But after 2018, when we raised this issue, the media quoted us, but the government, of course, you can see the laughable extent to the way the Kerala KCB, which operates most of the dam, looked at the dams. For example, for every dam, to ensure that it doesn't create avoidable flood disaster, there is supposed to be a rule curve. The rule curve essentially tells the dam operator how the dam is supposed to be filled during the monsoon and how it is to be discharged post-monsoon. So the rule curve actually tells you that you are not supposed to fill up as soon as your water. You should be filled up. For example, if the monsoon ends on 30th September, then your dam should be full or near full by, say, around 15th or 20th of September, so that you have some cushion safety margin. Now, but when the Kerala floods came and we raised this issue of wrong operation of dams, the media asked KCB that, we mentioned that rule curve has been violated because the dam was already full by the second week of August, which was complete violation of rule curve. When the media people asked the KCB, some of the KCB officials actually asked media, what is the rule curve? They didn't know rule curve. This is the extent of the carelessness of the dam operators in India. Post 2018 floods, Kerala has made a lot of changes. Even this year, they opened the gates even much earlier. In 2020, another instance where they have learned a lesson. In 2020, Sardar Sarovar created completely avoidable flood disaster in downstream area. Massive flood disaster, unprecedented in Bharuch and Ankleshwar area. When we raised this issue and we wrote about it, the Sardar Sarovar actually replied, Nigam replied. They set up a committee, but unfortunately the committee was of their former officials and retired officials. So they would only rubber stamp what they wanted to say. But interestingly, they denied, of course, they were completely in denial mode. No, nothing we have done. We have actually saved, they typically always tell us that we actually saved the downstream area from much worse flood disaster. If Sardar Sarovar wasn't there, it would have been, or every dam operator says that. But very interestingly, this year, the Sardar Sarovar gates were open right from the first week of August, which never happened at that time in 2020. This year, they opened right from the first week of August. And there are massive inflows into the Sardar Sarovar Dam. Inflows were up to 7 lakh, 8 lakh cusecs. But they could limit the release of water to around 5 lakh cusecs, which is contained within the river and doesn't really spread beyond the river bank largely. And so, and because they started early action, they could limit it to outflows till 5 lakh cusecs, and there were no floods. And today we are in a situation where those inflows have come down from 8 lakh cusecs to less than 3 lakh cusecs, and the disaster has been averted. So this is possible. So this shows that it is possible to do that. Uh, After 2018, when we raised this issue, the National Institute of Disaster Management, NIDM, is an institute under the National Disaster Management Authority. They invited me as a guest speaker to give a public lecture on role of dams in Kerala floods. And Central Water Commission officials, the Ministry of Water Resources, NDMA, and other agencies from state and central were there when I gave the lecture. And of course, again, Central Water Commission denied it. But the point is, and Central Water Commission actually sent their officials to Kerala to assess the flood, how the dams, how the floods was managed and so on. And they actually wrote in their report after the floods that the dams should follow rule cow. It's like a religious head which is guilty of all kinds of crime at the end of saying that we should not do wrong. It's something like that. That report did not even mention whether any of the Kerala dam had followed the rule cow. But its recommendation included that every dam should follow rule cow. In fact, rule cow also needs to be updated. For example, one of the issues that is in Hirakud this year debate is that the Hirakud is following rule cow of 1988. But the rainfall pattern has changed. There is so much siltation in Hirakud, its storage capacity is reduced. So, and there is upstream development which has changed the inflows pattern. So all of this means that you need to periodically update the rule cow. What we have been saying for long is that there is a solution. We can solve this problem by having, firstly, a management committee. And this is coming to accountability, the theme of the public policy lecture. Now, how do we get accountability there? So one of the ways is that, for example, every dam, there should be information in public domain, because transparency is the first step of accountability. So for every dam, every day during the monsoon and even rest of the year, key information should be in public domain, including inflows, outflows, storage, and whatever decisions they have taken during the day. Secondly, there should be a management committee for every dam, in which 50% of the members should be from local communities or independent people from media or academics and such institutions. But independent people who has track record of taking independent stand, not independent in the namesake independent. And that committee should have access to all the information, dam site records related to the dam. And it should be able to question the dam operator and so on. After every monsoon, there should be a report from the dam operator that how the dam was operated during the monsoon, what were the issues faced, and how they were resolved, taken care of. After every disaster that happens related to the dam, there should be an independent review committee which should go into what happened during the disaster, what factors played what role, what institutes and persons played what role, and what lessons one can learn for future. Who is responsible, if there are people responsible, and so on. So this kind of, if we have this kind of mechanism, governance around dams, and we will of course need, the dam operator will need good information, actionable, what I call actionable information. So we need to improve our forecasting. So typically, even now the forecasts are very broad, state level forecast, Rarely there are river basin-wide forecast. Even river basin-wide forecasts are not really useful because river basins are huge. So you need sub-basin related forecast and very time-sensitive forecast. That what a period are we talking about? Say in 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. What kind of rainfall is possible? In what particular sub-basin? Now that kind of forecast is required so that a dam operator can know, okay, in my catchment, this is possible. Secondly, we need very good river flow data. Even today, we don't have that in the catchment. For the rivers that in the catchment of any dam, you need river flow data so that the dam operator will know that the river that, river flow of, this river in the upstream is going to end up in the dam after, say, whatever 12 or 18 or 20 or 30 hours. And so he can prepare action, advance action is possible. So this kind of actionable information is required for the dam operator to take advance action. And once this is, in many cases, such information is available. Many cases it is not available, but it is still, once you know the rainfall is happening in the certain catchments. So first is rainfall forecast, then actual rainfall information, then the river flow information. Now this is the set of information that's required. Now once information is available that the rainfall has happened, he should be taking action. I'll give you an instance. In Surat, I told you about the floods in 2006 August. We wrote in detail about it. A friend of mine from Times of India, he told me, first person, he was sitting in the collector's office in Surat just before the flood started. And the collector was pleading. He was sitting with the Ukai dam operator, chief engineer Ukai. Ukai is the dam in the upstream Tapi river, which led to the floods in the Surat. So he was pleading that please open the gates and start releasing water. They were not releasing any water at that stage. Because he said that I have information from my friend collector in Nandurbar in the upstream that heavy rainfall is happening and that water is going to end up in Ukai. Now what did the Ukai chief engineer say? He said that no, I will just follow what my bosses tell from Gandhinagar or my own immediate boss tells. I can't follow what you are saying. I can't go by what information you have. And he refused to open the gates. And ultimately, within 3 days, they had to suddenly open the gate to release up to 14 lakh cusecs of water, which submerged more than half the Surat city. Historic high floods. So that was a completely avoidable flood because advance action was possible, necessary, and should have been taken because it was still August. The dam should not have been full by August 7th. So advance action is possible. Advance action should be taken. Rule curve should be followed, updates and so on. So all of this is possible provided there is the rule and there is the accountability mechanism. Unfortunately, there is no account. No dam operator has ever been held accountable in India for wrong operation of dams which created flood disasters in downstream area. Never. The only action and only accountability happen in a very unlawful way happened in Punjab. In Punjab, in 1978, there were severe floods. And Bhakhara Dam played a major role in contributing to the disaster. 2 years later, the chairman of BBMP was kidnapped by the Khalistani groups and shot dead. And they said publicly, the reason why we killed him is because he is the person responsible for creating flood disaster in Punjab 2 years back, which was completely avoidable. This is the only instance of, very wrong kind of accountability, but I have heard of. But otherwise, dam operators never get held accountable in India for wrong operation of dams. Even the Dam Safety Act, which, as somebody mentioned, Dam Safety Act passed by the parliament just last year. The Dam Safety Act, the earlier version came, it didn't even mention operation of the dams. When we critiqued it, then it did include operation of dams but that's also in a passing way. There is no real accountability even now. Uh, so, what we say is very clearly possible to achieve better governance and accountability, but and we can list the measures. The point is, how are we going to achieve those measures? Where is the will to achieve, implement such measures? Unfortunately, our governance is actually uh, going in opposite direction. The transparency of the governance is reducing, and the accountability, whatever basis remained of account holding anybody accountable, they are also reducing very fast in the name of mm, you know creating ease of business for the business people. They see environmental regulations as a bottleneck, or any such regulations as a bottleneck. So, even today, rule curves are not in public domain. And if they are not public domain, you can't even check whether the dam is following the rule curve. Today also, again, there is no real norms for accountability for the dam operators, or for coming back to the earlier case study about the environment clearance processes. They are diluting environment clearance processes continuously. So I think I'll stop there, and let us have question answer. I can try and answer questions that are there.